Thank you for your attention. I want to welcome everyone to the City Club of Portland and to the debate between our two candidates for governor, John Kitzhaber and Bill Sizemore. I'm Pete Heuser, president of the City Club of Portland. Our corporate sponsors for today are CH2M Hill, the law firm of Lane Powell Spears Lebersky, and the Weyerhaeuser Corporation. The debate today is also made possible through the cooperation of the City Clubs of Portland and Newburgh, the League of Women Voters of Oregon, the Oregon Alliance for Better Campaigns, and Coin TV, which is airing the debate live today, and I understand will broadcast it again this evening during prime time. Our moderator today is Coin TV's Jeff Gianola. As you know, we've had 3 prior candidate debates at the City Club, which I was asked to moderate. I also moderated the debate over the ballot measures. But now that we've got the big one, the governor's debate, we call in Jeff Gianola. I think maybe they're trying to tell me something. We all know Jeff. He moved over to Coin TV this summer, but he's been a TV journalist in Portland for over 15 years. Now, in addition to being an anchor on TV, he heads a program called Wednesday's Child, which is on Wednesday at 6 p.m., where they help place adoptive children. Now, I'll turn the program over to Jeff, who will introduce the candidates. Jeff will moderate the debate. We'll have a 2-minute intermission halfway through the debate, and during that time, I'll discuss some of the results of the recent City Club ballot measure studies and other recommendations that the club is making as we approach the election on November 3rd. Jeff Gianola.
Thank you, Peter. I'm glad to see so many of you here. The debate will have several sections today. First, each candidate will give a 3-minute opening statement. A drawing of straws earlier this month determined the order of appearance in this debate. Following the opening statements, candidates will respond to questions from our panel. Our questioners today are from the City Club of Portland and the League of Women Voters of Oregon. Please welcome Jay Formick, member of the Board of Governors of the City Club of Portland, and Muriel Woolley, treasurer of the West Clackamas County Chapter League of Women Voters of Oregon. Questions? The questions were submitted in advance of the meeting in writing by members of the City Club and the League of Women Voters of Oregon. A special subcommittee from both organizations selected the questions. These are the only questions which will be asked today. There will be no questions from the floor. The candidates have not seen these questions in advance. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. Following each answer, the opposing candidate will have the option of a 60-second rebuttal. Our timer seated in front today is Nikki Lynch, member of the City Club Board of Governors. Following the panel questions, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask 2 cross questions of the other. Following the rotation of candidate questions, each candidate will make a 3-minute closing statement. This meeting, of course, is governed by the program format I have just described and by the rules of conduct which are displayed on all your tables. No hissing, booing, clapping, or name-calling will be allowed. Please hold all applause until the end, and we will adjourn at 1:16. I would now like to ask the candidates to approach their podiums, and we will begin with our opening statements. If I could have our panel members come up here. Now, we will begin with an opening statement from Bill Sizemore, followed by John Kitzhaber. Mr. Sizemore, please begin with your opening statement. Remember, 3 minutes for opening statements.
Are we being notified by the timer as time approaches? Okay, thank you. It is indeed a pleasure to be here and speak to those of you who are in the room and those of you who are watching at home by television or listening over the radio. And it is my honor to represent the Republican Party of the state of Oregon in this race for governor. So often in political races, the voters have a choice between 2 peas in a pod, between Tweedledum or Tweedledee or vice versa. But not in this race. There is a profound difference, or many profound differences, between Governor John Kitzhaber and myself on a wide range of issues. I have spent the last 5 years of my life as the executive director of Oregon Taxpayers United, where we have worked to lower taxes on the people of Oregon. In fact, your newspapers have been telling you across the state that indeed we have been successful, that Oregonians are paying hundreds of millions of dollars a year less in property taxes than they would have been had it not been for the efforts of myself and friends and our organization. At the same time that I have been working to lower taxes, my opponent in this race, John Kitzhaber, has been working to increase taxes. In fact, the Oregonian said recently that you could easily say that John Kitzhaber has proposed $1 billion in new taxes. Now, let me tell you what those new taxes are. For example, the governor proposed that the state keep and spend, not return back to the taxpayers their income tax refunds or their kicker checks. He's proposed that if he's reelected, he wants a 9-cent per gallon increase in the gasoline tax, a doubling of vehicle registration fees. Actually, the bill calls for allowing tripling of vehicle registration fees in the Tri-County area. He's also proposed a telephone tax so that there's a new tax added to everyone's telephone bill. And he's also proposed an odometer tax, a tax where Oregonians will be penalized at the end of the year for the miles they drive their car, whether they're driving their kids to school or driving their kids to work. I believe that the taxpayers of Oregon, the families of Oregon, are paying enough money in taxes already to have first-class schools and roads and parks, etc., that the answers to our problems in Oregon today are not more taxes. And so if I am elected governor of the state, I hope you will see this as this debate unfolds, I will not propose that the state increase the tax burden on the families of the state. Instead, I will work to produce for the taxpayers from government their money's worth for the taxes that they're already paying. Thank you.
Remember to hold your applause to the end. Mr. Kitzhaber, your opening statement, please.
Well, first, I'd like to thank the City Club for sponsoring this debate, and I welcome the chance to tell you why I'm asking for a second term as your governor and to tell you what I plan to do with that opportunity should the voters grant it. You know, this is an incredibly great place to live, and we're very lucky to live here in a state with such breathtaking natural beauty, a state with such a high quality of life, and a state where really people still have the capacity to look beyond their differences to those goals that we share in common. And I think it's a gift to live in Oregon. It's a gift because our parents and grandparents and those who went before us had the wisdom and the courage and the vision to make the choices and the investments necessary that enabled them to pass this state on to us in such great shape. And now it's our turn. And I think that we have the opportunity and indeed the responsibility to make sure this state is as great a place when we hand it on to our children as when we inherited it. So the question it seems to me we need to be asking is, what do we need to do today to make sure that our children enjoy the same specialness of place, the same quality of life with which we've been blessed? The question is whether we will be the generation that takes responsibility for Oregon's future, whether we have the wisdom and the vision and the courage to meet the challenges necessary to do so. The challenge of educating our children to make sure they can succeed in a very competitive and complicated world. The challenge of helping our children make the right choices so we don't lose any more of them to juvenile crime. The challenge of growing in a way that allows us to prosper, but which doesn't leave behind the environment and the quality of life that's so important to people who live in this state. Those are the challenges that we face. And what Oregon looks like in the next 10 or 20 years and the kind of place we pass on to our children depends on our willingness to meet them. And this Oregon challenge has nothing to do with your party registration or where you work or where you live, but it has everything to do with Oregon's future. These are common challenges that we can and must meet together as a community and as a state. And I think one of the most important jobs of the governor is to identify those common goals that we face and to bring Oregonians together around a way to achieve them. And my goals are simple. The best schools for all our children, no matter where they live, removing the financial and geographic barriers to a college education, not losing any more of our children to juvenile crime, making investments in our roads and community infrastructure to make sure that all parts of the state enjoy the benefits of a good economy, and managing our growth in a way that allows us to preserve our quality of life and our environment that we care so much about in Oregon. This is not a liberal agenda or a conservative agenda. This is an Oregon agenda. and it represents the broad political center of the state, and it is the responsibility of elected officials to implement it and bring it home. So I look forward greatly to this next hour as we discuss how we achieve these goals and what we can do together as a community and as a state for Oregon's future. Thank you.
We will now move to the portion of the program which consists of questions from our panel. I'm going to turn the program over to panelists Jay Formick and Muriel Woolley. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. Following each answer, the opposing candidate will have 60 seconds to rebut. And the first question for Bill Sizemore will come from Jay Formick. Jay?
Mr. Sizemore, many argue that the real effects of property tax reform measures 5 and 50 have been masked because of a booming Oregon economy. If we experience another recession in this state, what do you predict will happen with school and local government resources?
The governor has talked a bit around the state about his philosophy of making government recession-proof and having a tax system that is recession-proof. And what I understand recession-proof taxation to mean is that when the economy goes sour and the people are struggling to pay their bills, to pay their mortgage payment, to put food on the table, that government will be preserved and protected from what's going on in the economy. That's one of the reasons why governments like property taxes so much, is that the property tax is not related to a taxpayer's ability to pay their bill. You can lose your job and your property taxes can go up 20%, or at least they could have before we passed measures 47 and 50. And the taxpayers can suffer, but government would be preserved. I believe that education, which is dependent upon, has been dependent on property taxes, and shifting that, taking that burden off of the homeowner, and many elderly people who simply cannot afford that burden, and shifting that burden to the state and the state income tax, we have made education vie with other services for prioritization and spending. And I can tell you that my commitment to public education and the commitment of others in the legislature is such that education will always be prioritized regardless of what's going on in recession or not.
Mr. Kitzhaber, 60-second rebuttal.
Well, I'm not sure Mr. Sizemore answered the question. The question is what happens to this state and what happens to our school system in a time of recession? The fact is that we have destabilized school funding by shifting it from the property tax to the income tax. I agree with Bill on some of the problems with the property tax, but it is stable during a recession. The income tax is volatile. I'm not arguing for an inflation-proof government. I'm arguing for an inflation-proof school system. We have to educate children whether the economy is good or bad. We can't just write off a generation of children and say, I'm sorry, some people in Asia didn't manage their affairs, so you don't get an education. That's not how we do business in this state. Vic Atiyeh, Republican governor, in the recession of the 1980s, came in and asked for an 8% temporary surcharge in the income tax, which was passed with bipartisan support to support the schools. I don't want us to get there here in the state of Oregon. This is an issue we have to look at seriously because we have a very serious long-term problem with school funding in Oregon, and it needs to be taken seriously.
Muriel, the next question for Mr. Kitzhaber.
Mr. Kitzhaber, you have said that you have an aggressive youth crime prevention strategy. Mr. Sizemore has spoken of the need for firmer punishment at home and in the schools. Please tell us specifically about the components of your juvenile crime prevention strategy. What specific programs will you propose?
There are 5 elements to the strategy. First is the high-risk juvenile crime prevention strategy that targets those children who are about ready to commit a serious offense to keep them out of the system, both for their own good, to reduce people from being victimized, and because the tremendous costs of getting in under ballot measure 11 draw money out of the budget on the prevention side. Secondly, we want to expand early childhood programs such as Head Start and our community safety net programs, which identify kids at risk of abandonment or abuse and intervene with the community-based programs before the children are damaged. We need to get the schools more directly involved in local juvenile crime planning processes so that when they identify a child with risk factors, you can get them to a community-based program in time. We also want to do 2 more things, be much more aggressive in our attack and our assault on domestic violence, because it's in the home where the pattern of violent behavior is passed from one generation to the next. And we need to deal with a very serious problem of substance abuse. Over We have one of the highest rates in the country of kids abusing drugs, which is directly correlated with the problems of juvenile crime. I will be doing this within existing resources, expanding drug and alcohol treatment, the juvenile crime prevention strategy, and the expansion of early childhood programs within the existing resources in the budget. And I hope that I have strong support from this group. I believe the next dollar we spend on public safety in this state needs to go to keep a child out of jail in the first place, rather than building a cell to lock them up in after they failed.
Mr. Sizemore, rebuttal.
Recently, a national juvenile crime watchdog group reported that a child, a young person, generally has to commit 5 or 6 crimes before they actually show up on the radar screen of the juvenile justice system. What that means is that all of the times that the child is not shown that there are consequences to their actions, you are only reinforcing in their mind that they can get away with this, then why can't I get away with the next thing? In fact, children will, young people will, adults will probe the boundaries to find out how fast they can drive on the freeway between Portland and Salem, or how much they can get away with in the classroom. They will probe the boundaries, and if we want children to respect the law, we must begin sweating the little things, not allowing them to sass teachers at school, not allowing them to litter as they walk down the hallway of the school. When you sweat the little things, you send the message to young people that we will not tolerate this kind of behavior, and they will in fact modify their behavior.
Mr. Sizemore, our dependence on gambling, the state lottery, as a source of funding for state programs is a concern for many Oregonians. Now there are plans for more private casinos. What should we be doing about this?
I don't support state-run gambling. I don't believe the state should be in the business of promoting gambling. The Oregon voters have passed the lottery in Oregon. It is the law of the state. And I believe it must be the voters who turn around and go the other direction if we are indeed going to eliminate gambling. I think video poker was a bad idea, and it began sucking more people into gambling. I believe that the biggest mistake we could make at this point would be to even consider allowing slot machines or line games, which you just pull the lever and it's very easy. It doesn't even require a basic knowledge of poker as video poker does. So I would oppose any expansion of the lottery into line games. And to the extent possible, I would not approve additional casinos. I realize the problems we are when we're dealing with Native American tribes and the federal government as well, but I would do my best to prevent any expansion of gambling in the state of Oregon. People want to gamble on their own privately. I think that's their own business. I'm kind of a libertarian, but for the state to be involved in promoting gambling or licensing casinos, I would do our best to not turn Oregon into another Nevada.
Mr. Kitzhaber.
I think we substantially agree here. I think those of us who were in the legislature when we adopted video poker, and I was one that voted for that bill, that knew where that was going to take us, we probably wouldn't have done it. I didn't vote for the original lottery. I think it is very problematic in this state, and I have opposed the additional line games, the expansion of the state video poker operation, and believe we need to increase resources targeted at gambling addiction, and also try to wean the state operating budgets off of lottery revenues and use those for capital construction or debt service. On the tribal side, as Mr. Sizemore says, we are dealing with sovereign tribes, and there is a federal law that dictates how we can manage them. We're entering into a compact, and I have worked to develop compacts that limit tribes to 1 casino per tribe, and I have drawn a very bright line about not allowing them to purchase off-reservation property, bring it into trust, and put a casino on it. It's a growing problem. It's something Oregonians are going to have to deal with, and I think there's a growing consensus that we have a real issue here.
The intent of the Columbia River Scenic Gorge Act has been threatened by recent controversies, such as the construction of a private residence, the possible location of a Native American tribal casino, and the refusal of both the Oregon and Washington legislatures to provide adequate funding for the Gorge Commission. What actions do you advocate, if any, to protect the gorge from development pressure?
Well, I'm a strong supporter of the Gorge Scenic Act, and I was a proponent of adequate funding for that act in the legislature. Unfortunately, the legislature made severe cuts in that appropriation, as did the Washington legislature. And the result of that is you have a gorge commission that doesn't have the resources and the staff capability to really do its job in terms of getting ahead of some of these building site permits. And the House in question, I think, is a good example of that. And you've got members at the county level who are not particularly supportive of the Gorge Act and are trying to undermine it. This is a national treasure, not just an Oregon treasure, and we need to protect the scenic attributes of the gorge. This is part of who we are. This is one of Oregon's special places, like the coast, like the Cascades. And we simply have to step up to the plate and renew our efforts, and I'm doing that with Governor Locke and with our congressional delegation to talk about how we move through this. I'll put in my budget funding for the Gorge Commission again. I'll lobby for those resources, and I'll work with Governor Locke. This is it would be a tragedy to have as part of our legacy destroying the special places of this state and the special places of the Northwest, and the Columbia Gorge is certainly one of them.
I agree that with the idea of setting the gorge aside as a scenic wonder and preventing development there. I think the real question is, how do we do that? I am a firm believer that the right to own private property is the very cornerstone of a free society. And I don't know that people really can say they own their property if the government has the right to tell them that they cannot use it. The question is not, should we set the gorge aside and preserve it from development for our generation and future generations to enjoy its beauty. It truly is a remarkable place. But the question is, do we buy it or do we steal it? And just simply dictating to people that own property that's had great value because of its scenic view and say, we're going to take that property from you, or we're going to declare it a park, and you can own it and pay taxes on it, but you can't develop on it, I think that's wrong. So the question is not, do we preserve the gorge, but do we steal it or do we buy it? I suggest that we buy the property in the gorge and preserve it.
Mr. Sizemore, we know much more about what you oppose than about what you favor. As governor, you would have an opportunity to move Oregon closer to your vision of what the state should be like. Could you please elaborate on your vision of what you want for Oregon in the next 20 years?
Yeah, actually, I've been asked that question quite a few times, and I can tell you that often the question is asked, people forget that there's more than one perspective as to whether the things I've been doing are positive and constructive or whether they are negative or being against. For example, when you reduce taxes, people inside government often say, well, that's a negative thing, that's a destructive thing. But people out there struggling to survive, struggling to pay their bills and stay in their home, meet their mortgage payment and feed the kids, they see a reduction in taxes as a positive thing. They think I am for them when I reduce their taxes, not against them. So I would not agree with the basic assumption of the question that I have been stating what I am against. I believe I have stated what I am for. I am for the people of the state and the families of the state having more money in their pockets, and I've worked to do that. Now, if I was elected governor, and I hope to be, it will be my goal that the people of the state get the best quality services for the lowest possible price. And I will be asking every state agency to present a budget that is no greater than the budget you had last time. Instead of the old policy of spending every dollar you have, even if you have to dump it out at the end of the fiscal year just to get rid of it so you can ask for more, you will instead say, I am going to give the taxpayers of the state the most amount of service for the lowest possible price.
Mr. Moderator, I would like to rephrase the question. I don't believe it was answered.
The rules of the debate are each candidate will have 30 seconds to answer this question, and there will be no rebuttal, and we'll begin again with Mr. Sizemore. 30 seconds to answer the question again.
Is he going to rephrase it?
Rephrase.
Could you please elaborate on your vision of what Oregon should be like in the next 20 years?
I will do my best to preserve. I'm going to talk about education and growth real quickly. I'm going to do my best to make sure that as growth occurs in the state of Oregon, we do not force those hundreds of thousands of people inside the urban growth boundary and ruin the density of our existing communities by too much density, but allow development on secondary lands outside of the urban growth boundary. And also I want to turn public education around in the state and make it no longer about money, politics and collective bargaining, but about really educating kids by putting things like discipline and phonics back in our schools rather than just saying they need more money.
Mr. Kitzhaber, 30 seconds to answer the question.
Well, let me say at the beginning that I think my Oregon challenge is the means to an end, and I will describe for you the end. It's a state where every child has the opportunity to get a quality education that will allow them to succeed, and college is affordable no matter where you live and no matter what your income is. It's a state where we reach out to troubled kids and at-risk kids before they get into trouble, so we put our resources helping kids be successful, not locking them up. There can be no throwaway children in our state in the future. We have to have a state where we have a secure, stable job base and have made the investments in our transportation infrastructure so we can grow smart, so that we can grow in a way that preserves the integrity of our neighborhoods and preserves our quality of life. And you can't do that by throwing out the urban growth boundary in 25 years of successful land use planning. I believe that the Oregon of the future will be a place where we have a very diverse economy and where we reach out across the mountains, across geographic boundaries, and really do have one state, where we are civil to each other, where we respect our differences, but don't lose sight of the common objectives we have and the fact that we are citizens of a great state and a great gift, and we all have the responsibility and the opportunity to keep it that way for our children and for the future.
Next question, Miriam.
Mr. Kitzhaber, many Republicans, including Mr. Sizemore, believe that more parents should have the option of sending their children to private schools and that tax breaks or vouchers for private school education are appropriate. What evidence do you have that such tax breaks would actually harm the public school system?
Well, I oppose vouchers or tax breaks. I oppose taking kids to private schools by pulling dollars out of the public schools, and I base it on the issue of equal opportunity. That's part of a democratic, pluralistic society. And one of the things that most of us have in common, even as the state becomes more diverse, is the common experience of a public education. And I think that if you break this system down into a group of private interest-based institutions, who is going to take care of the kids who need the help the most? Who is going to provide kids who have disabilities, or kids who aren't required to be taken care of by the private schools, kids who need extra care, kids from poor families? Who's going to give them the equal opportunity to achieve, to become successful, the next generation of teachers or carpenters or civic leaders? That's the job of the public school system. Part of the contract that this country has always had with its citizens is that everyone has an opportunity to get a public education. And I emphasize public education. I believe in private schools, but I don't believe that they should be operated at the expense of the public school system. That leaves the most vulnerable and the people who often need the most help behind, and it deprives many people in our society of that chance for an equal opportunity and an equal career of success and happiness, and I simply don't support it.
Our entire economy is based on the concept that competition is good. That competition gives the customer the highest quality at the lowest possible price. And yet we take perhaps the most important service that we have, and that is educating our children, and we expect to get the highest quality at the lowest price by giving a government monopoly and saying that no matter what kind of education they give our kids, that's the only educational choice they have. I believe that parents should have the opportunity to choose where their children are going to be educated. Recently, the city of Milwaukee opened up a test voucher program for inner city kids. And there was just a rush of children to get out of the failing inner city schools and into schools where those children can get the kind of education they need to survive. And I believe that competition is in fact the best way to save public education. I don't believe public education will be harmed by competition. I believe it will be greatly improved and enhanced by genuine, real, open competition.
Mr. Sizemore, because of term limits, the 1999 Legislative Assembly will seat a record number of new legislators, many of whom have never before held public office. Do term limits make sense, or are they detrimental to good government?
Term limits are a great idea. Term limits recognizes what a legislative body is, that it is in fact made up of representatives of the people. And if you've been in Salem and been in the legislature a lot, the first thing you notice is that people gain experience all right, but often they gain experience hearing one side of the story from a whole horde of paid lobbyists who come in constantly making sophisticated professional presentations about how government needs more money and more taxes and all these programs need to be financed. When With term limits, what we get is a constant turnover of people coming in with their feet on the ground, people that have just had jobs in the private sector, have run businesses in the private sector, and they truly represent life in the real world. But as without term limits, what we get is more and more career politicians who have lost touch with what's going on in the real world, have lost touch with the very idea of what it's like to meet a payroll, what it's like to actually have to fill out all the paperwork and live by all the regulations that the politicians have been dishing out. I think the best legislators are those who have the most recent experience in the real world and not those who have been in Salem for a long, long time.
I think term limits are a terrible idea for the legislature. I think people like myself in statewide elected office should have term limits. I oppose them for a couple reasons. One, it's an admission on the part of all of us that we're not able to go to the polls and decide whether this person has become a career politician and is no longer serving us. We have the ultimate power. It's called the general election. It's just an abdication of our responsibility. Secondly, what really happens down there when you have turnover is the institutional memory of the place shifts from the legislature to the paid lobbyists. The only people that have been there for 20 years are the people who are lobbying on the outside. Next session, there's not going to be anyone in Salem who remembers why we did the Education Act, why we did the health plan, why we did the tremendously successful workers' comp reform back in the late 1980s. There's going to be no fiscal experience, so you're going to have people with virtually no fiscal background or experiencing putting together a $10 billion budget. I think the benefits of term limits are way overshadowed by the downside, and I think we're probably going to have to live with them, but I think it was a mistake, and I think we'll look back and ask ourselves, why did we do this to ourselves?
Mr. Kitzhaber, the rift between urban and rural Oregon is legendary. What are the most important issues that each side needs to understand about the other, and what would you do to ease the division between us and them?
Well, I think that it's not just legendary. I think it hopefully can become a legend. The first thing we have to do is remember that we're all Oregonians. We all live in a common state with an interconnected economy. People in this area have to understand the needs of basically a natural resource-based economy. Eastern Oregon and Southern Oregon has to be more than a playground to people in urban Oregon. They have to remember that folks out there, good folks who work the land and have been there for generations, are earning a living that we benefit from. People in rural Oregon have to understand that building light rail in Portland to deal with congestion actually helps them if they're trying to get their products, agricultural products, around the port of Portland and out and still allow them to be competitive on the world market. I think it's an issue of communication primarily, and I have spent most of my first term traveling, as my wife will attest. I've been east of the Cascades 60 times on visits to try to reach out and talk to folks over there. And of course, I came from Douglas County in a rural part of the state when I was in the legislature. This is something that I think is easy to take care of. I think good conversations between Chamber of Commerce's in Portland and in Eugene with those in Burns and Lakeview and Bend is very beneficial. And I think this is something that has to be a very high priority. Oregon is not going to be a good place for any of us to live unless it's a good place for all of us to live. And that means we have to respect our differences and remember our common goals and objectives.
Let's begin by recognizing that this problem is not just a problem between rural and urban Oregon. It's also a problem on a federal level between a Congress and a U.S. Senate, a House and Senate that's made up of East Coasters who think that people out in the West here still fight cowboy and Indian wars. That in reality, we have laws imposed upon us by the federal government that are voted on by people in the East or Congress people from the East who have, the consequences have been devastating to the economy here in Oregon. I am very familiar with this shift or this rift, that there's two things that we could do right now to actually alleviate the pressure. One, it would be to recognize that the land use laws we've had here in Oregon for the West are more appropriate on the West side than they are on the East side. That the sagebrush that they're trying to protect as prime farmland over there is in fact land that should be open for development so they can grow. And finally, we need to get rid of this crazy bear and cougar law that is threatening the livelihoods of people that live over there.
Mr. Sizemore, during each election cycle, voters are faced with an overwhelming number of complex ballot measures that often have unintended consequences. What reforms of the initiative process would you support to resolve these problems?
Let me begin by saying that It's just a matter of opinion as to whether a ballot measure has unintended consequences. The question assumes that you know what the people who wrote the measure actually intended, and you may or may not. In reality, I think Oregon's initiative process is working well, and the criticisms generally come from those who disagree with the initiative in the first place. And so they say it has consequences that they didn't like. They may or may not have been intended. The one proposal that I have made, and I don't make it just affecting the measures that I've supported, and that is that I think the process could be improved if we would, in fact, open up initiatives after they've been filed to allow the legislature and the chief petitioners to amend an initiative and say, is there a middle ground? Is there a way we can compromise and make this measure a better measure? And have some of the give and take that already exists in the legislative process. I do not believe, for example, that Measure 47, which I drafted, was a flawed measure. I believe that measure was a better measure than what the voters replaced it with, even with my support in Measure 50. I believe that 47 was a good law. It was understandable. I was willing to work with the legislature to come up with a compromise, not to give away what we had won with Measure 47, but to make those improvements that would take that measure beyond the reach of the courts, because we wouldn't want the courts to throw out a measure that the voters have approved.
Well, I think I defend the initiative process and would oppose any proposal to keep people from having access to it, but I think it is flawed the way it's currently being used. I object to being able to pay petitioners and essentially buy a change in the Oregon Constitution. The fact is, many of these are written so poorly that they do need a lot of work and have untoward consequences. 16 were on the ballot in '96, 4 passed, 1 was declared unconstitutional by the courts, and ballot measure 47, I just beg to differ with Mr. Sizemore, was so confused that nobody knew what it meant. And we spent 4 months in the legislature trying to figure out how to correct that measure and put it back on the ballot again. We need to pay people by the hour, not by the signature. We need to increase penalties for violating residence requirements. We need to increase the number of signatures necessary to change the Constitution versus change the statute. And we clearly need to have some means of reviewing these things before they get on the ballot so people really understand what they do. We probably also need to look at how they're counted in light of recent developments.
The 1999 legislature may simply refer a record number of measures directly to the ballot in order to bypass your veto pen. Who should bear responsibility for this? A stubborn legislature or an inflexible governor?
Well, I think the way it works down there is, I'll remind you, I'm sure at least one more time today, is that the governor proposes and the legislature disposes. I know that very well. I don't object to the legislature disposing. What I object to is the legislature not proposing alternatives to deal with what I think are very serious problems, and those are the problems of education, reducing juvenile crime, and managing our growth, Dimension 3. When I was in the legislature, we had more of a political center than we do today, and that's just a fact. Back in the 80s and early 90s, Larry Campbell and I worked very well together when he was Speaker of the House and I was President of the Senate, and we had 3 or 4 issues that weren't partisan issues, and I've just mentioned them. They were Oregon issues, and we worked together to resolve them. I don't object to the legislature bypassing me and taking things to the ballot. They have that opportunity to do it, and I'm willing to go out and fight ballot measures as well. So I don't think it's a matter of fault. I think it's probably a matter of philosophy. But I do believe that we have the capability, and I think we'll hopefully demonstrate that in the near future, to resolve these issues using the ballot less and the legislative process more. When you think of last session, though, there are really only about 2 issues we got into loggerheads on. One was the death with dignity bill that they sent back to the voters with a very obvious reprimand, I think, from the electorate. And the second one was the transportation package. But by and large, we got our business done without that kind of acrimony. To the press, I know war makes better copy than peace, but the fact is we got a lot done with very little acrimony.
Interesting words from someone who has set near records for the number of vetoes that they have enacted or signed. The fact of the matter is, and you have to give the governor fair credit, we have a legislature that for nearly the first time in 40 years is Republican. And the people of the state have seen fit to send Republicans to Salem to control both the House and the Senate. And we have a governor who is on the opposite side of the fence, and it is without a doubt going to produce gridlock. The Republicans want to go one way, the governor wants to go the other. The best way to avoid having a lot of measures referred to the ballot because they are afraid of the veto pen of the governor is to elect Bill Sizemore as governor. And I assure you there will be very little of that as the Republicans in the legislature and the Republican governor will get a lot accomplished.
Jay, go ahead.
Mr. Sizemore, what is wrong with the educational standards for certificates of initial and advanced mastery? And how should student achievement be measured?
I have been very open about my view of outcome-based education, Goals 2000, House Bill 3565, the CATS plan, all the names that's known by in Oregon. I do not believe that it measures academics. I believe that it measures more politically correct thinking than it does whether our children are getting the basic fundamental education they need. And when I say basics, I mean getting education back to reading, writing, arithmetic, setting standards that are measurable to the point that we no longer socially promote children, that a child must perform at grade level before they move on to the next grade. First thing I'd like to do to get us back to basics is to put phonics back in our schools so that all of our children will learn how to read. I believe the greatest damage that we have done to public education in this state is to drift away or abandon a system that worked almost 100% of the time for a whole language approach, which fails about 40% of the time. And if all of our children will learn to read, they will be much less likely to drop out, much less likely, of course, to test as they do in the state of Oregon currently. At 52% of 10th graders cannot even perform reading at grade level. So I would turn away. I would not throw any more good money after bad. I would prefer that we actually drop the outcome-based education system and go back to measuring real academics.
Well, we all know I'm a very strong supporter of the Education Act. I think 20 years ago when I was first elected from Douglas County, you could drop out of high school in the 10th grade and get a good job in the mill with good benefits and the expectation you'd have it for the rest of your life. Those days are gone forever. The number of low-skilled jobs that can support a family wage is simply not there anymore today, or it's dwindling rapidly. We are doing basics in our schools. We're teaching reading, writing, math, social studies. We're simply asking kids to be able to apply what they have learned, not simply rote and memorize it. And that's what employers are demanding today. You can talk to the high-tech industry. You can talk to John Shelk in a high-tech log industry in a mill in Eastern Oregon. They want young people who can do critical thinking, who can do collaborative problem solving, not just people who've memorized something. That's the real world, and these standards weren't dreamed up by somebody in the Department of Education. These are what is demanded by the real world these kids are going to have to go into. We created the world. We need to give them the tools to master it.
Muriel.
Mr. Kitzhaber, what new revenue sources or what reduction in current programs would you suggest to adequately fund K through 12 education?
I believe that with the existing revenue forecast and assuming that no expensive ballot measures pass in November, that we will have the resources with existing revenue growth to provide adequate resources to the K through 12 system. I'm looking at about another $200 million that would be connected directly with services that can be demonstrated to improve student performance towards the goals. We need to recognize that in this particular school district, you have not only that larger issue, but you do have a structural operating deficit in the Portland School District. Most districts don't have that. That has to be dealt with as well, I think, in this next session. The state has to put some resources towards that. The school district here has to step up to the plate and make some changes inside the Portland School District. But with the current revenue growth, I believe we can accomplish what we need and provide our schools the resources to move forward on the Education Act with existing resources.
Mr. Sizemore, rebuttal.
I believe that we are already adequately funding public education in the state of Oregon. I do not believe that there is a need for more money beyond adjustment in spending for the rate of inflation and increases in enrollment. In fact, I object to the focus of in education on dollars. I believe we have done that to the detriment of public education to constantly say we have a funding crisis. We need to spend more money. I do not believe the problems in our schools today are related to money. I do believe that if we would put discipline back in the classroom, give teachers the authority to deal with disruptive students so they can create a learning environment in the classroom, where it's possible to teach, it's possible to learn. And if we would put phonics back in our schools so our kids will learn to read and stay interested in the rest of their education, that we would do more good for our schools and more good for our children than if we gave them another whole truckload of money.
Please remain seated, and at home, stay tuned. We're going to take a quick 2-minute break. When we come back, the candidates will question each other. We'll be right back.
On January 28, 1994, station KOIN-TV was granted a license by the Federal Communications Commission to serve the public interest as a public trustee until February 1st, 1999. Our license will expire on February 1st, 1999. We have filed an application for license renewal with the FCC. A copy of this application is available for public inspection during our regular business hours. It contains information concerning this station's performance during the past 5 years. Individuals who wish to advise the FCC of facts relating to our renewal application and to whether this station is operated in the public interest should file comments and petitions with the Commission by January 1st, 1999. Further information concerning the Commission's broadcast license renewal process is available at 222 Southwest Columbia or may be obtained from the FCC, Washington, D.C. 20554.
During this portion of the program, each candidate will ask 2 questions of the other. Questions must be asked in 30 seconds. The opposing candidate will have 1 minute to respond, after which the questioner will have the option of a 30-second rebuttal. And we will alternate between the candidates, and we begin with Mr. Sizemore.
Governor Kitzhaber, in our debate in Medford, I brought up the fact that you had supported the sales tax that Barbara Roberts supported in 1993. And in that exchange, you mentioned that, in fact, that sales tax was, for all the dollars that were raised in sales tax, there was an offsetting reduction in state income tax. I wanted to give you an opportunity to restate your answer there.
The sales tax that I was directly involved in was not the one in 93, it was one in 1985. I was in the legislature when the Roberts sales tax collapsed in a special session, and the one I was referring to was the 1985 sales tax, of which I referred as Senate President with the help of Tony Meeker and a large majority in the legislature. Didn't do very well at the polls, if we recall. But in that sales tax proposal, the rate was locked in the Constitution, and that each dollar that we raised in sales tax went to reduce income tax. It was a revenue-neutral sales tax in 1995. I'm not sure we could say that for the one in 93, but the 85 sales tax was, I think, a very good one, as good as we've had on the ballot. Didn't fare very well.
Mr. Sizemore, 30-second rebuttal time in this segment.
Well, I believe, Governor, that the sales tax that you supported in 1993, the Barbara Roberts sales tax that you were on record at that time as supporting, was not revenue neutral. In fact, according to the state's legislative revenue office, it was a tax increase of approximately $1.2 billion. So I just wanted to set the record straight that sales tax that was on the ballot in 93 that you were supporting at that time was, in fact, a $1 billion tax increase.
Mr. Kitzhaber, question?
I asked you this question last week, so I'm sure you're ready with the answer. You oppose mass transit as a way to deal with congestion. You've said we've got plenty of revenue in the current road system to have good roads, and yet you've proposed a beltway around Portland to deal with the transportation congestion issue. The estimated cost is around $7 billion. I just wondered if you could explain to us how we're going to pay for that.
Well, let me begin by saying that we have in the Tri-County area now a problem that we're spending more than 70% of our total transportation dollars on a mass transit system of buses and light rail that is used by approximately 2.8% of the population, or 2.8% of the actual trips made. So the problem we have is not that we don't have enough money for a transportation system to be able to allow people to move from one part of the city to the other. The problem is that we're spending our money on a mass transit system that they're not using and abandoning roads which they are using. I think the average person out there is voting for light rail simply because they want to get all those other people off the road so they can drive. Unfortunately, they're doing the same thing. And what I propose that we do is we put before the voters a real package of building the highways that we need in the Portland metropolitan area. Tell them how much it costs and let them have the choice as to whether or not they want to pay for it.
Rebuttal.
Well, the cost of that would be like between a 50 and 80 cent a gallon gas tax increase, and I think it's fair to say voters would say no to that. They have said yes to light rail. It seems to me your position when they said yes to light rail was to put it on the state ballot and say no, what local people want they can't have, but you're willing to give them something they won't possibly vote for. I don't think you've answered the question of how we're going to deal with the very real problem of congestion in the Portland area and how we're going to pay for it.
Next question.
Governor, in the voters pamphlet, you have a statement opposing Measure 59 in which you, I think, mislead voters into thinking that if 59 passes, that we will more or less do away with the voters pamphlet. And I don't believe that truly represents reality. In fact, you even say it would be illegal to have paid statements in the voters pamphlet. And the state Supreme Court has struck the word illegal from the explanatory statement because they said it was not right or accurate to say that.
Well, I take my guide from the Supreme Court, although I don't always agree with them, and it's clear to me that the Supreme Court ruling on Measure 59 is it would have a chilling impact on the voters pamphlet as we know it today, which is one of the most effective means of communication between the citizens and the candidates who are running. I think the real concern with Measure 59, however, isn't the voters pamphlet. It's the fact that once again we're taking one segment of our population who happen to be public employees, teachers, police officers, prison guards, and trying to reduce their ability to have a voice in the political process, and I object to that. I think this state is big enough and we should be brave enough and have the courage to allow everyone to put their opinion on the line and debate them on the merits. And I think this is very bad public policy. It's very divisive, it's unnecessary, and it certainly doesn't belong in the Constitution.
Rebuttal.
If Measure 59 passes, all public employees will be free to make political contributions to their union, to any candidate or any measure they choose to. They will not lose their right to contribute to any cause. They just simply won't be having money taken out of their paychecks, often against their will, to support causes they don't believe in. And according to the Secretary of State, the official statement that if it will save the taxpayers $1.8 million, enough money to hire 33 school teachers if we will just make the special interest groups who put ads in the voters pamphlet pay the full cost of their ads. I saw you going for the button.
Time. Mr. Kitzhaber, next question of Mr. Sizemore.
Well, you have made a promise to never raise taxes, and I guess I would just pose a theoretical, hypothetical question to you. Suppose the economy goes down 10 or 12% like it did in the 80s. A 1% reduction in revenue forecast is $100 million. If the schools in this state are facing $1 billion shortfall, will you still stick to that pledge? And if not, what will you tell the parents of the Portland School District and districts around the state?
I have indeed taken a pledge that I would not increase taxes. And I have also been the sponsor of ballot measures which say that we will not allow government to increase taxes unless they put that tax increase to a vote of the people. I believe that government is taking enough money from people today, and we need to turn our attention towards giving people more money than constantly and consistently saying, well, we could give our kids a good education if we just had more money. In reality, if there was a situation, a true emergency arise, all of my ballot measures that I've written on this subject have said that if there is an emergency, that we can, in fact, put the question before the voters whether they believe that they need to be paying more money because of an economic downturn or because there's not enough money to adequately fund schools. All I say is that if you really have a case to make that we need more money for schools, make it to the people from whom you are going to take the money.
Rebuttal.
Well, I have a different definition of leadership. I think what leadership's about is making these decisions as an elected official and facing the music when you go back for re-election. If you referred something like that to the voters, they'd come under your own double majority. So we could have a majority of people voting to support our schools and a minority of people who stay home and don't vote actually having an impact on this. I just think that funding education is something that should be beyond politics, and we need some real leadership to make sure our schools have the resources necessary to educate these kids in good times and in bad times.
We are now going to move to the final portion of the program. 3-minute closing statements from each candidate. The order for closing statements was determined by the drawing of straws earlier this month, and we will begin with John Kitzhaber.
Let me thank the City Club again for sponsoring this debate. I really enjoyed this hour. And I want to tell you that it's been an honor to serve as your governor for the last 4 years. And today I want to ask for your support for a second term, because I think together we can meet this Oregon challenge I've been talking about, and together we can secure the future of this state for the next generation. And I think most Oregonians have a common vision of what that future ought to look like. It would be an Oregon with good roads and good schools and good jobs. It would be a state with safe streets and healthy children, a place with open spaces and parks to play in and clean air and clean water, and the ability to travel from one part of the state to the next without getting stuck in traffic. That's the future that I want to see for this state. And I think most people share that vision. I don't want to tell my son, you should have seen what this place looked like 20 years ago. And I don't want to tell him that this was the generation that refused to make schools affordable. This was the generation that let them decline. It didn't help kids get to college. I don't want him to remember this generation as folks who wrote off a whole lot of children and watched them slip into the lives of crime, content to build prisons to lock them up in, but unwilling to reach out and help them when they need it the most. Instead, I think it's time for us to take responsibility for the future of this state, because this future isn't going to be handed to us. We're going to have to build it. And that means that each and every one of you is going to have to do your part, and that you are going to have to hold your legislature and your governor responsible for doing their part. You know, as I mentioned earlier, there's an old saying, the governor proposes and the legislature disposes, and I can give a testimony to that fact. But in the last few years, we've had a legislature that has been very quick to dispose and very slow to come up with solutions, and we can't accept that in this point in our history. We can't accept a legislature that refuses to face Oregon's challenges. We can't accept a legislature that's unwilling to give our kids the schools and the education they need, or that's unwilling to make college affordable. And we can't afford a legislature that's unwilling to pay for our roads, that's unwilling to invest in the prevention of crime, that's unwilling to protect Oregon's quality of life in the face of unprecedented population growth. I need your help in Salem, in short, to hold the legislature accountable as I expect you to hold me to meet the Oregon challenge. And that's really what this campaign is about. It's not about choosing a governor. It's about choosing a future. And that challenge doesn't end on November 3rd. That's when the real challenge begins. But on November 3rd, we need everyone to vote, not just those who are planning to vote, but the people who care about this state, the people who care about these issues have got to turn out and vote. A voter turnout is absolutely critical for all that we care in and believe in. So today, I ask for your vote, and I ask for your ongoing and active involvement as together we meet the Oregon challenge.
Mr. Sizemore.
Thank you all for listening today. I appreciate the courtesy. I believe that John Kitzhaber is a good man, and I believe that the policies that he espouses are espoused with the best of intentions, and his motivations are good. And I would not impugn them for a moment. But I believe that the choice Oregonians have in this election is between a conservative Republican and a liberal Democrat who embraces policies that we have as a nation embraced for nearly 40 years now, and have found that those policies, with their best of intentions, have in fact often had the exact opposite consequences, disastrous consequences. I remember when it used to be safe for children to play in the streets, when you could let your child walk a few blocks to the grocery store and not give a thought to it. But the philosophy and the policy that we're just going to worry more about preventing crime than we are putting the rapists and the murderers and molesters in jail and keep them there, instead of saying that we're just going to work on reforming them and we'll release them back out on the streets when we think that they're cured, only to find out that they've done the same things again. I believe done with the best of intentions have had disastrous consequences, even to the point that our burglary rate is out of control, and that in the city of Portland, the word grand theft auto, you remember that term? Now only consequence for stealing a car is a citation. I believe in education. There was a time when we talked about, we had the Pledge of Allegiance in our classrooms and the 10 Commandments on the walls, and we even said a prayer sometimes. But today, the liberal policies have made it such that we are now passing out condoms and having AIDS awareness and abandoning the philosophy that once made our school system a safe place, a healthy place for our kids to be, where they got a good education in reading, writing, and arithmetic rather than what Jack Roberts now calls racism, recycling, and reproduction, the 3 R's. In the area of land use planning, I believe that the land use planning system that was supposed to make Oregon a better place and housing more affordable has in fact resulted in Portland having one of the least affordable housing states or cities in the entire nation. Great ideas, great motivations, but disastrous consequences, often the opposite. The choice we have this fall is between John Kitzhaber, who believes that if we just would pay enough taxes, we could have good schools, roads, and parks, and Bill Sizemore, who believes the problems in government today are not related to money, and that the people of Oregon, the families of Oregon, cannot afford another $1 billion in taxes. I ask you to please give me the chance. Send a message to John Kitzhaber. Vote for Bill Sizemore November 3rd.
Thanks to our candidates for an enlightening debate, and thanks to our co-sponsors for helping to organize the debate. A special thanks to our student panelists, and thanks for all of you being here and all of you watching at home. We are now adjourned.